Good afternoon. Today we're here with Masiel, who is a prestigious member of MFE. And for today, we're just going to ask her some questions about her Entrenadores program. So first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I love that you're calling me prestigious. That is not an adjective I would use to describe myself, but yes. I am the executive director of the Montclair Fund for Educational Excellence, which is the local education fund in Montclair that supports, our public school students, teachers, families. We have been around for 30 years. I've been the executive director since 2015, and I love, love, love this job and this organization.
What about the when you started when in sorry, what in MFE when did you kind of decide to start Entrenadores?
Yeah, that's a
And
really
when did you?
Sure. So we started the umbrella program is called Navegadores Escolares, and Navegadores Escolares started in June of 2021. And Navegadores matches Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking community members with families who have recently immigrated to the US, most of whom have immigrated from Central and South America. And we started that program because we were running a program, another program at the time that was a peer mentoring program called PEEPS, where we matched high school students with middle school students to really support each other through the pandemic and through remote learning. And we had done a presentation about that program at a Board of Ed meeting, and we got a call from an administrator, a principal, who asked if we could include some multilingual learners in that program because he said, many of the multilingual learners were particularly struggling during that time because they were in remote learning. They really didn't know a lot of kids. Some of them had immigrated to the US during the pandemic and hadn't seen another child like in a year. So they were struggling, navigating the language, navigating school, navigating computers and Google Classroom. So I am embarrassed to admit that I was like, of course, we said yes, but I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't know that we had really a significant multilingual learner population in Montclair at all. I've lived here for 20 years. I'm Latina. I go to a church that, have a bilingual mass. And even then I was pretty clueless about this population of students. So, we said, of course, we'd love to include them. And so we connected with a couple of students. And as we were engaging with them through that program, we realized how hard it was for them to really navigate the schools and meeting with their families. We realized how hard it was for them too to try to keep up with communications, to really support their students when they, weren't speaking English and not much was being translated. And there really wasn't a lot of resources for the students and families. And there weren't really other organizations who were really dedicated to supporting this population that we quickly learned was really growing in Montclair. So we started Navegadores in June with about 15 students. And by the end of that summer, those 15 families had connected us to so many other families, and many of whom had just immigrated or were in the process and needed help getting their students even registered for school, which we learned was a really hard thing to do if you don't speak English and if you don't have a computer and if you don't have internet, because the school registration process was all online and all in English and required like scanning documents and uploading them, which is really hard for a family who like does everything on an Android phone and doesn't have data really.
Yeah.
So we said, let's help with that. And as we met more and more students, we realized, particularly for our high school students who were coming in to Montclair and into the schools, some of them had had interrupted learning because of COVID. So that meant they had been out of school for a few years. So they were coming into the high school or coming into the middle school in algebra classes and biology and US history, and they're just starting to learn English and they hadn't been in school for a while. So they were really struggling academically and, socially too. They were still feeling pretty isolated. So we tried to connect them to other nonprofit groups in town that had after school programs, but they really didn't have folks who spoke Spanish, or, kind of a dedicated tutoring program where folks spoke Spanish or Portuguese. So we thought, well, let's just try to, build something. And we thought it would be just kind of interim until the district could kind of build a program too, or for the students. And so by November of that year, November of 2021, so like 6 months after we started Navegadores, we launched Entrenadores, bless you,
Sorry.
which is, no, it's okay. And so Entrenadores Escolares is our tutoring, bilingual after school tutoring program for our teens, our 6th through 12th graders. And we started with high school tutors, students who really, and we're so indebted to you, Matthew, and your peers, because we could not have built this program without you guys. We really couldn't have. As we don't have, when we started, we didn't have a dedicated teacher. We had a coordinator, Leslie, but we didn't have, a teacher on staff. It was really the students, and that helped really build that support network and that academic support network for our multilingual learners. And now we are here 2.5 years later, and now have a full-time certified teacher on staff. And we were able to actually build a second bilingual program for our little ones, our kinder through 5th grade students, called Oruguitas.
Yeah,
So now we offer 5 days of programming for multilingual learners.
that's great.
Mhm.
So, Entrenador is like it kind of started small, but like I'm guessing like the networking's what grew it, not just like with like tutors, but also kids, because
It's
right?
absolutely true that the networking, and that's what I love, and I'm so inspired by the work, because Navegadores grew from 15 kids to, we're now over, I think we're at 140 kids. And that because we work with the whole family, so that includes babies to kids in college. So we have 140 kids in the program in only a couple of years, and we haven't really advertised it. It's all been word of mouth. One family pulls in another. Same with our tutors. You've done a great job of helping to pull in other tutors and other teens who come in to support the students. And it really feels like it's this network that grows out of love, and out of a real commitment to supporting our fellow students, our fellow community members. I am so impressed with the tutors that are part of our programs, because you guys really are so genuine and authentic in your support of the kids and this work. So it's kind of cool to see how it's just grown by one person drawing in another and another and another.
Yeah, it's cool to see. Like it's also like nice meeting the kids too.
Yes.
Mm. So, are there other organizations like around town, like in MFE or not, that are kind of similar to Entrenadores and Orguitas?
So there are definitely other organizations that we've met along the way that were supporting immigrant families and refugee families. And they started in 2016, shortly after Donald Trump was elected. And, there were some really, kind of harmful policies towards immigrants, and really some hateful rhetoric. And so Montclair is a sanctuary city, and the faith communities came together and created a couple of organizations. One was called the Montclair Sanctuary Alliance, and it's a group of faith-based organizations in Montclair that kind of said, hey, we're going to support, refugee and immigrant families that come to Montclair. And they did, they started with just a couple families, and they really supported a handful of families. And they would do things like, help to find clothing and help to find housing, and drive to doctor's appointments. And then there's also another organization called the Refugee Resettlement Alliance. And they are volunteers from Immaculate Conception Church, one of the Catholic churches in town. They also have a little house where folks can come, refugees can stay there for a few months until they get on their feet. They work closely with an organization called Catholic Charities that's based in Newark. So those two were there, and we are very closely aligned with them. They have been, so that, kind of MFEE and those two really work together hand in hand to support families. we, I think, have been able to build a network that supports more families and provide more services to the, you know, our immigrant families, in part because we were able to get some funding, some sustained funding to be able to hire staff to help do this work. So that's been a game changer. So those are the groups that are really helping to work with some of our immigrant families. And then we have other after-school programs that provide tutoring and mentoring. But again, you know, those groups just didn't have the capacity to really support our multilingual learners, just because in part the language, but I think what is so special about Entrenadores is, yes, we center like the kids' language, but we really center the kids. And so they're here in a space where they're not the only, right? Like they're not the other. They are the community. They're it. They're here with people who look like them and speak like them and have similar experiences in terms of that transition journey, which is very traumatic. And so here, this is like a little place of home and refuge, I think, for them.
I really like the community aspect because I think it's really I personally think it's really important that people know that they're not the only ones that are like if they're struggling with something, they're not the only ones and they're not it's not just them. I feel like it's really good to know.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of most um appreciative of and like excited that this exists for the students because they're spread throughout, you know, schools and they're spread throughout classrooms. And so they move through the school day sometimes a little bit, you know, on their own, or now they're, you know, there's more and more numbers, there's little
Yeah.
clusters. But, you know, we have teachers who volunteer for us, especially with the little ones, and they come and they're like, "Oh my God, I've never heard him speak." Because in school, they're pretty quiet or shy or nervous. And here, they're just, I think
Yeah.
they're so comfortable. Like you get to really see the kid who they are.
Yeah. I think that's great. And
Mhm.
also about the other two organizations, I think it's like really cool that you guys like are working with them also and networking.
Yes, it's really, and we're continuing conversations to think about how we can develop more systems and to be more like a more robust network and working together and how we can all like help lift the voices of, you know, our students and families and really help to nurture their advocacy too. So, and it's great. They're such a lovely network. They're all like I mean that's what like warms your heart about Montclair is that these people really care, like, and they really mean it when they say they want to, you know, kind of be there for their brother or sister, right? Like, and their neighbor, like they really mean it. And they, you know, they donate to us to help us get this van. They, you know, they donate food, they donate clothing, they helped us drive people places. A lot of our drivers for entrenadores came from those church communities and those faith-based communities. So yeah, it's awesome to have that kind of love and network in this town.
Yeah. And also like those groups are like mostly more about like immigration. So I actually have like, a couple questions about
Sure.
immigration.
Yes.
So like what do you think is like a common motive for like families or just people in general to immigrate to the US?
Yeah. So I think the biggest reason families immigrate here is just because they are facing such dire poverty in their home countries. Certainly, we have a large number who have also faced violence, and many, like we have many families from Nicaragua that are facing persecution and, you know, kind of are being targeted by the government and you know similarly from some other countries. And I so we have folks who are seeking asylum through the asylum process, and then we have folks who, like I said, were just um so had really no other option, really. I mean, it sounds extreme, but no other option to survive. Like they just didn't have food and no prospect of getting enough of an earning or to really sustain a future for themselves and their kids. And if you are that desperate to, you know, put every last dime that you can scrape together, or really in most cases, commit yourself to being in debt to make the journey here from so far away. And it's such a hard journey. I've heard the stories from many of our families, and the stories that you hear about in the news of people dying in trucks because they didn't have windows, or and ventilation, or coming over in cattle trucks, or walking in the desert for days on end without water and getting lost in the desert, and being with a group of people and not all of them making it. Like, that's what our kids have gone through
Yeah,
in their families, and they come here because there was just no other option for them in their home countries. And many of them, when they first arrive especially, are desperate to go home. Nobody, I think that's the thing that we don't really realize about immigration. I think, especially from an American perspective, we kind of see it as like, oh, they're coming here to, like, just take advantage or take resources, or um and it's like, no, like, they couldn't live, like, they had to find a
yeah,
way to survive, and it's about survival.
yeah. I feel like given the choice, almost everybody would choose to stay in their home country. No one, no one.
100%. And I don't think people realize that. I think people think like, oh my goodness, of course, like, why would you want to come here? It's like, no, they'd much rather stay in their home countries.
Yeah, and even with like some students who like moved away from like Montclair that were in Entrenadores, I know like they're talking about like moving back to like Nicaragua, and like they don't plan on staying here long term because they just want to go back to their home country. It's where they are.
Yep. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, that's where your roots are. It's what,
Yeah, exactly.
so I kind of see as our work, it's like, we're just here to support in whatever way we can, to give a little bit of a reprieve for, because certainly, we recognize that it's just not an easy journey to get here, and then to continue to be, kind of navigate this country, this town, this community. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. But I agree with you there. I feel like not a lot of people like kind of think that like a lot of people think that they're kind of coming just cause, but I don't think anyone really wants to.
Yeah, like, it was like like, they didn't give it, like, oh, and I don't think people really understand how hard it is first to make that decision, and then to actually get here. It's amazing to me how, and I'm from Texas, not that, my parents immigrated in the 50s from Mexico, and very familiar with border towns, and grew up hearing of immigrants crossing the border and, getting killed and dying in the deserts. And it's horrible. Like, so I know how hard it is to get here. So when they make it, I kind of feel like, listen, I'm not going to question like why or what. I'm just going to, like, help because you're here. You made it.
Yeah,
You're here. And, I mean, and we talk about it in a, like, very theoretical, this idea, and it seems like everybody in this country, like, seems to have a sense of pride about it, this being a country built by immigrants, but we just forget that when it comes to these particular immigrants, like,
yeah,
somehow we get amnesia. um and the worst case is, we have so much hate. um so that's also hard.
yeah. Okay. So also, I feel like a lot of kids, not their point of view isn't like represented as much when it comes to immigration.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of people kind of neglect not even just people, but like maybe even families neglect how it affects the kids. So how maybe if the kid is being forced to immigrate or if they're being like left behind because like a parent has to go and send money back. Like, could you tell a little bit about like the children's experience in immigration?
Yeah, and I think it, it varies. It's
Yeah,
different for
a lot.
every child, right? But I do think that first, we certainly have, I'm thinking, like, my brain is going through the kids in our program, and I know I've had conversations with some of them who, are really heartbroken that they had to come here and leave everything behind. And like, I think you've probably had some conversations with some kids who, desperately want to go back and want to be back there. And it makes everything so much harder. Learning, right? Like coming here and having to do homework, and it's hard, and it's just like I I can't imagine. So to me, it's understandable when I'm, working with a student and they are struggling to like stay focused or motivated, and I'm just like, I want to meet them where they're at, right? And still say, and you can do this. We can do this. I think that there's also some families, as you referenced, that have made the impossible decision of coming and maybe bringing one child and leaving another behind. That has to be so hard. One of our oruguitas, the dad immigrated first and then brought his wife and their 5-year-old son, but they had to leave their 10-year-old daughter behind. And they're still struggling to figure out how they bring her here, and if they bring her here. We had another family with a mom who came on her own with her fourth grade son because he was being used as a mule by, drug gangs. And she knew that she had to get him out because they would find him. So she made the difficult decision of leaving her home country with that one child and left her 3 daughters behind. And, it took her 2 years to get the girls to be able to get the girls here. Like it's that kind of stuff. Like that's heartbreaking, like gut wrenching stuff that these kids are dealing with because they're either, they know they're leaving their families behind or their siblings, or on the other end, they're there and their parents are here, right? Like we had other kids, little kids. They were first and second grade and they got separated from their aunt. The mom was here. They came over with an aunt a year later and they got separated at the border and we couldn't find them for 2 weeks. Nobody knew where they were. And it's just on, we had another little kid in kindergarten who we had just signed up for. He started school in September. He was in Oruguitas and such a sweet little guy. Like he struggled. He cried for 2 weeks at the beginning of school. Like it was so hard. Like I would have to go to the school and try to help calm him down. But eventually he got there and he was so happy and he loved it. And his mom got a call to go to the courthouse in Newark, and she had been given an ankle bracelet, which is a new program that the United States started last May to address the overflow of immigrants that were coming in through the border. They will, for us, from what we understand from some immigration lawyers, it's somewhat random where the Border Patrol will basically tag some people, give them an ankle bracelet, and that is basically a signal to that person that they're going to get deported within 30 days, but they just can't process them fast enough. So they allow them to go with their family members here in the United States and don't tell them what the ankle bracelet is for. And so that happened to this one mom in our program. She had her ankle bracelet. She got a call and was told to report to immigration. And she thought it was to get her ankle bracelet off. And they told her to bring her son. And so she went. And then her sister called me later that afternoon and just was beside herself, panicking because she hadn't heard from the woman. And she was worried about the little boy because she's like, they don't have food. Nobody's called. She's not picking up her phone. And so we tried to make phone calls to try to figure it out, but it was impossible to really know. And she got a call from her sister the next evening um, after she had been sent to Honduras.
That's
Sent
awful.
her back. They didn't, nobody knew. The little boy didn't have anything. They literally took them with the clothes off their backs. They took away their phones when they got to the immigration court, and they didn't give it back to her until she landed in Honduras.
Awful. So they
Awful.
literally just can't remove this brace on their leg.
And so what we've learned, and we work very closely with the lawyers from Catholic Charities, they've done legal workshops for our families. And we were just spreading the word to say, hey, heads up, if you know this, if you know somebody and they've gotten a bracelet, they need to get a lawyer fast, because that's the only way that they can at least try to make a claim for asylum, or at least be prepared, right? Because it's super traumatic to not know what's happening. And
Yeah.
so we've been trying to spread the word, or the lawyers, just to kind of spread awareness to families. But yeah, it's a new program that was actually piloted in a few states, and New Jersey is one of them.
So, that's so like dehumanizing also.
So dehumanizing. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there are advocacy groups, legal organizations that are trying to fight the policy. Um, but I just don't, they haven't really made much movement. It's still in effect. Um, it's heartbreaking. It really is.
Yeah.
So we, like I said, the issues and the stories that we hear about, immigration, struggles, and the inhumanity of the immigration policies and processes, they play out here. We see it firsthand with our kids and their families. So it's not like far away just because we're far away from the border. Like they are living it, and we're seeing it here.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the questions and the
You're
answers.
welcome. Thank
I
you.
really, I actually like, I didn't realize like just how bad the like immigration process is, and like especially like that last story too. Just like no regard for people.
Nope, it's pretty horrible. That's why, I think of um that's why I'm just so impressed and inspired by these kids, because
Yeah.
they have gone through more in their young lives than most of us will go through in our entire lives. They have dealt with so much more already.
Yeah. All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Matthew, like I said, for being such an incredible part of this program, really helping to build it and sustain it, and bringing in new people, and for the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.